this quote-unquote fear of COVID to manipulate who they surrounded themselves with. They didn't want this person to come, and so they were changing their minds on what the rules were for getting in. And this person had stood outside for 5 hours in the freezing cold, so I made a scene and I left. I was like, I'm not going to associate with this sort of behavior.
Yeah, there's a lot of brainwashing when it comes to politics, and I honestly think it ties into money.
Let's start from the beginning. I grew up in New Jersey with two really liberal parents, or they were very, very liberal at the time. My mom is a Korean immigrant who came here when she was about 13 years old, learned English here, worked her ass off, and lived out the American dream. My dad is an American from New Jersey, born and raised there. And when I was really young, my mom actually volunteered on Hillary Clinton's first campaign. And my dad brought me to Obama's first inauguration, which I was so young and had no idea what was going on. All I knew was that it was the most important moment in history, and my dad dragged us out of the house like the night before. So we went all the way from New Jersey down to DC, did not have a hotel booked. Everything was completely full. So we slept in the car and then went to the inauguration. And all I remember is that it was freezing cold, snowing. It was so packed. People were crying, so excited. Beyonce was there. I couldn't see shit, but whatever. So I definitely grew up thinking that being a Democrat and being on the left was the equivalent of having morals.
So if you guys don't know what's going on, this young woman made a video about how she was indoctrinated by the left her entire life. And one thing is very interesting about American politics, and I don't know if it's worldwide, it may be, but I'm just going to speak about America. Politics here tend to be extremely tribal, and it's almost as if you're joining a gang when you're in a political party. And I don't think that's right. What I mean by that is Republicans and Democrats have actual stereotypes, and they all live in like neighborhoods. It's like groups of Democrats or groups of Republicans. But the reason I think that's a problem is because if you're just voting, if being a Democrat or Republican just matches your identity as a person, it's virtually impossible to vote objectively election to election, because a Republican may do something that you don't like, but if you're in that cult of Republicans or in that cult of Democrats, you're going to vote for them anyways. And this young woman talked about how she was indoctrinated by the leftist group her entire life growing up. And it started when she was young, going to inaugurations. Her parents believed this. They demonized the other side. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it.
Wanting people to be treated equally, being anti-racism, anti-misogyny, all these things. And one other thing to note is that I grew up basically atheist, although I think my dad still had some Christian tendencies, but he was just not very involved. So like I didn't go to church or anything. And like I've mentioned in other videos too, my dad is schizophrenic. He has had a crazy, crazy life, and it's impacted me in tons of different ways. And I think when I was younger, I operated from the place of, well, look at my dad who's been dealt this crazy hand and it's not fair and he's suffering. He can't hold a job. He's in jail, in and out of psych wards, and no one understands, no one cares. I felt very alone and isolated in that experience. And I remember thinking that that was because mental illness had such a stigma around it and people were so judgmental. And if people were more progressive and liberal, then they would care and I could speak openly about it, which I don't believe to be the case now. But at the time, I cared a lot about this, and I looked at my dad as this victim, somebody who didn't deserve the hand that they were dealt. And I felt that he couldn't help himself. It wasn't his fault. I just wanted people to feel bad for him because I felt bad for him. Like, that was the origination of where I fell to the left. And then I moved to New York for college. I've been in New York ever since then. And I remember going to the Ferguson marches in New York City. And at the time, you know, I wasn't the most well-versed in politics, but I was still involved. I was pretty involved for my age, I would say. And I would go to like the Young Democrats Club meetings in New York City. And I went to the marches, and I remember just feeling so moved, and I felt like I operated from a place where it was feelings first, and that it felt like a human experience to put your feelings first and to feel for other people. And so when all of this was going on, I felt very, very affected for the families. I'm not a Black African American, and I want to show support for them if they feel, and for this group of people, if they feel unsafe and discriminated against. And then I was still like very progressive and liberal by the time I graduated college here in New York. And I didn't really think too critically about policies. I think that was really the crux of everything. I felt, okay, I care about other people. I want to help them. If they're saying this, and that, then it must be true. Why should I question that? If that's their experience, let's listen to their feelings. Also, in New York, we are truly indoctrinated to believe that the rest of the country hates immigrants, hates minorities, hates women. I remember growing up, like, while I was in college here, I never traveled across America. I was like, America sucks. I don't need to go to the South. They're going to hate me. They're going to be mean to me. It's going to be dangerous. Truly, that was the mentality that I was accustomed to living in New York City. And you know what's so funny is that living in New York City, you think that you're like going to be...
And there's actually a phrase that they call this. It's like, they call it like northern elitism or something, or where people northern or not in southern or Republican states have this weird idea that people who are there are just racist, they're bigoted, they are stupid. They have these ideas that are just not true. And this is what I go in, like the tribalism that comes with political parties. They teach you these things that are just literally not true, and it makes you a little paranoid. It makes you indoctrinated. You are indoctrinated into a political party to the point that it doesn't even make sense to vote differently. You can't even imagine voting differently because your entire life is cultivated around this idea that the other party is just evil or racist or stupid or bigoted or like, no, it's a trick. I don't know who's starting it. I don't know the point of it, but that's what I'm seeing.
Be an outcast when you go to any other state in the country because you're pro-abortion, pro-women's rights, pro-whatever, LGBTQ. But the reality is, if you're outcasted in the rest of the country, it's because you're going to those states with this mentality that all these people hate you. You're paranoid. You also make way more money than everyone else in the country. And you are, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I realized that also when my mom, my stepdad moved down to Florida, and I started going to Florida a lot more. I started going to other places in the US, and I realized nobody's treating me any differently. In fact, they care less. And I just think that it's really terrible. It's toxic how in New York City and probably in LA and San Francisco as well, we are truly indoctrinated to believe that everyone is out to get us. Like, we're truly breeding paranoia. I kind of left college just feeling the same way. You know, I didn't think that much of it. Really, the major shift in my thinking started around COVID, and I think that's probably the case for a lot of people. So I was living here in New York City throughout COVID, and it was a mess, right? And I had a group of friends from college. Almost all of them are super, super liberal. Some of them are self-proclaimed socialists. And I have mentioned some of them in past videos and how they actually harbor like clear racist tendencies. But that's besides the point. I had this group of friends, and you know, every group of friends has different dynamics and there's different relationships amongst individuals in those groups. And I had a friend that was kind of like on the outskirts of this group that I was closest with, and maybe they weren't as close with the rest of the group. And one of our other friends was getting engaged during COVID. And so we had decided, okay, we're going to have a small engagement party for them. And they requested that all of us just get, you know, a test before we come to show that we don't have COVID. Fine. So we all got a test. And then on the day of this party, my friend on the outskirts of the group waited in line for like 4 or 5 hours outside in the freezing cold, because this was in December of 2020, to get this test. And she finally got the test, texted the group and said like, hey, I got it. It's negative. What's the address? When she sent that message, I was already at the apartment with all these people, and they all looked at each other and they were like, okay, so-and-so got her test and it's negative, but I feel like she shouldn't come anyways because I saw that she was out with other people earlier this week. So like, we don't really know if her test matters. I think I just needed something so glaringly hypocritical to snap something inside of me. And that was definitely the thing that really woke me up, where I realized that this was nothing to do with COVID. And in fact, they were just using this fear, this quote unquote fear of COVID, to manipulate who they surrounded themselves with. They didn't want this person to come, and so they were changing their minds on what the rules were for getting in. And this person had stood outside for 5 hours in the freezing cold. So I made a scene and I left. I was like, I'm not going to associate with this sort of behavior.
Yeah, there's a lot of brainwashing when it comes to politics. And I honestly think it ties into money. I think it ties into money. There are people who probably profit off of people, you know, being delusional on one side and believing things without seeing proof. There are people who profit off of it, even though it's not for the betterment of society. And I'm happy that this young woman like woke up. And it's not the fact that she's leaving a party and joining another party. That's not the point. You shouldn't leave a party and join another party like it's a gang or anything. That's not how it works. You should vote on policies that make sense to you all the time. You're not in a gang. You're not in a group that you have to be in. No, you can have both beliefs. But anyways, I'm going to leave that there. My name is Jojo, and I'll see you in the next one.